Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. This time, we're going deep on mental models with this fascinating book, Mental Models. 30 thinking tools that separate the average from the exceptional. It's by Peter Hollins.
Oh, this is a good one.
Yeah, it really is. And I think anyone listening can get a lot out of this. Make better decisions, solve problems more effectively, even understand the world a bit better.
I think what makes this book so powerful is that it gives you these frameworks for thinking, like almost like giving you a new lens to see the world through.
Definitely, like a mental toolbox filled with proven strategies. We're not just going to summarize the book, though.
Right.
We're going to dissect some of the most interesting models, the ones that we think will really resonate with you all, and talk about how you can actually use them in your everyday life.
It's all about practical application, right?
Absolutely. So the book kicks off with decision-making, which makes sense. It's something we all do every single day. Chapter 1 is all about making those decisions with both speed and context.
Yeah, I love how Peter Hollins just jumps right in with actionable advice. He doesn't waste time.
Right to the point. And the first mental model he introduces is called address important, ignore urgent. I think a lot of people can relate to this.
It's something that I know I struggle with, for sure.
Yeah, me too. It's so easy to get caught up in the whirlwind of urgent tasks, putting out fires all day. But then you end up neglecting those important things that actually move the needle in the long run.
Exactly. That's why this model is so valuable. It forces you to differentiate between what's truly important and what just feels urgent in the moment.
And the tool he uses to illustrate this is the Eisenhower matrix. Have you heard of this?
Oh, yeah. It's a classic.
It's a simple but brilliant way to visualize your tasks and prioritize effectively. Basically, you divide your tasks into 4 quadrants.
So you've got your urgent and important tasks, like those things you absolutely can't ignore, deadlines, emergencies, stuff like that.
Right. And then you have your important but not urgent tasks.
Those are the things that are crucial for long-term success, but don't have that immediate sense of urgency, like planning for the future, working on your relationships, personal growth, those kinds of things.
The stuff we tend to put off, even though they're really important.
Exactly.
And the Eisenhower matrix really helps you see that, It visually reminds you to make time for those important but not urgent tasks.
Because if you don't schedule them in, they're just going to get lost in the shuffle.
Okay, so what about the bottom 2 quadrants?
Well, you've got your urgent but not important tasks.
Like those endless email chains that could have been a 5-minute phone call.
Yeah, things like that. Or maybe requests from colleagues that pull you away from your own priorities. Those are the tasks that we often feel obligated to handle right away, but they don't really contribute much to our overall goals.
So this is where delegation comes in, right? If you can, find someone else who can take those tasks off your plate.
Exactly. Free up your time and mental energy for the things that truly matter.
And then, of course, there's that last quadrant, the tasks that are neither urgent nor important.
The time wasters.
The distractions, the things we do when we're procrastinating or feeling overwhelmed, scrolling through social media, watching cat videos. You know the drill.
Yeah, we all have our guilty pleasures.
So this model really encourages us to be ruthless with our time. If something falls into that not urgent, not important quadrant, it's probably a good candidate for elimination.
It's about being honest with ourselves about how we're spending our time and making sure we're focusing on the things that actually align with our goals and values.
Okay, so that's address important, ignore urgent, and the Eisenhower matrix. Super valuable tool. The next mental model in the book is visualize all the dominoes.
Also known as second-order thinking.
Right. And this one emphasizes the importance of thinking beyond the immediate consequences of our decisions.
It's about anticipating the ripple effects, both the intended and the unintended.
Like those chain reactions, where one decision leads to another and so on.
The book uses a really interesting example to illustrate this, a hypothetical newspaper contest described by John Maynard Keynes.
Oh, yeah, I remember this one.
Imagine you're given 100 photographs and you have to pick the 6 prettiest faces.
Sounds simple enough.
But here's the catch. The winners are the people who pick the faces that the average person would consider the most attractive.
So you can't just go with your own personal preference. You have to try to predict what other people will think.
Exactly. You have to think beyond your own opinion and consider the average person's perception of beauty. And that's second-order thinking.
It gets even more complex when you realize that other people are probably trying to do the same thing. They're trying to predict what the average person will think, which is third-order thinking and so on.
It's like a mental chess game.
So how do we apply this second-order thinking to real-life situations?
Well, let's say you're considering a new job opportunity. A first-order thinker might just focus on the salary increase, but a second-order thinker will consider the domino effect. How will this new job affect my work-life balance, my commute, my relationships?
The things that aren't immediately obvious.
They'll think about the potential downsides like longer hours or increased stress, but they'll also consider the potential benefits like maybe new learning opportunities or a more fulfilling work environment.
So it's about taking a more holistic view, right? Playing out the different scenarios, both positive and negative, before making a decision.
Exactly. It helps you make choices that are more aligned with your overall goals and values.
Because sometimes that initial appealing choice might lead to some unintended consequences down the line.
And we want to be prepared for those. Okay, so we've talked about thinking about the long-term impact of our choices, but sometimes we get stuck, right? Especially when we're afraid of making the wrong decision.
Oh, absolutely. Analysis paralysis, it gets me every time.
But the thing is, not all decisions are created equal.
What do you mean?
Well, the next mental model in Chapter 1 talks about this. Make reversible decisions. It's a game changer, really.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, he talks about two types of decisions, type 1 and type 2.
Okay, I've heard of this. Type 1 decisions are like those big life-altering choices, right?
Right. The irreversible ones, the ones you can't really undo.
Like getting married or having kids.
Exactly. Those decisions, you really want to think those through carefully.
Absolutely. But what about those type 2 decisions?
Type 2 decisions are reversible. They're more like experiments.
So you can try something out, and if it doesn't work out, you can always change course.
Exactly. Think of things like, I don't know, buying a new gadget, trying a new restaurant, taking on a new project at work even.
So the takeaway here is, don't get bogged down in analysis paralysis, especially if the decision is reversible.
Exactly. If you can easily undo it, don't overthink it. Just take action, see what happens. You can always adjust later if you need to.
It's about being adaptable.
Right. And that's crucial in today's world, right?
Yeah.
Things are changing so fast, you've got to be able to pivot, adjust, experiment.
This model encourages us to embrace that, to be more agile and adaptable.
And to view decisions as learning opportunities.
Okay, I like that. So we've talked about being decisive, but we also need to think about the long game, right?
Absolutely. And that's where mental model #6 comes in. Minimize regret.
Okay, tell me more about this one. It sounds interesting.
This one is also from Jeff Bezos, and it's all about making decisions that your future self will thank you for.
It's like a time travel hack for making better choices. I love it.
It really is. The framework is pretty simple. First, you project yourself into the future.
Like how far into the future?
As far as you need to go. But the book suggests imagining yourself at 80 years old, looking back on your life.
Wow, that's a powerful visualization.
Yeah.
I could already feel the wisdom wrinkles forming.
Right. And then you ask yourself, will I regret taking this action? Or will I regret not taking this action?
It's about weighing the potential regret of inaction against the potential discomfort of action.
Exactly. Because sometimes the thing we'll regret the most is the chance we didn't take, the opportunity we let slip away.
Because we were too afraid or too comfortable.
This model is especially helpful when you're faced with a tough decision, one that involves some risk or uncertainty.
Yeah, it can help you push past that fear and go for it,
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, it's better to try and maybe fail than to never try at all.
So we've covered some great mental models for decision making. But how about seeing the world more clearly? That's got to be important too, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that's exactly what Chapter 2 dives into, how to see more clearly. It's all about cutting through the noise, recognizing our biases, and challenging our assumptions.
The first model in this chapter is ignore black swans. Now, I've heard this term thrown around, but honestly, I'm a little fuzzy on what it actually means.
Yeah, it can be a bit confusing. Basically, a black swan event is a highly unpredictable event that has a massive impact. It's something that's completely outside the realm of normal expectations.
So like 9/11 or the 2008 financial crisis.
Exactly. Or the COVID-19 pandemic. Those were all black swan events, things that nobody really saw coming but had huge ripple effects.
But this mental model isn't saying that we should just pretend those events don't exist, right?
No, not at all. It's more about avoiding overreacting to them.
Because it's natural to feel fear and anxiety when something like that happens. It shakes up our whole world.
Right. But we have to be careful about making drastic changes based solely on these outlier events.
Because our emotions can definitely cloud our judgment, especially in times of crisis.
We might make impulsive decisions that we later regret.
So this model is about maintaining perspective, even in the face of uncertainty.
It's about distinguishing between significant trends and those random, unpredictable occurrences.
So we don't get swept away by every little blip on the radar. Okay, that makes sense. What's the next mental model?
The next one is look for equilibrium points. This model is all about understanding how progress happens over time.
I'm curious about this one. Tell me more.
Have you ever noticed how when you first start learning something new, you tend to make really rapid progress at the beginning?
Oh, yeah, totally. Like
Yeah.
you're all excited, you're motivated, you're soaking it all up.
Right, but then at some point, that progress starts to slow down. It takes more effort to keep getting better.
You hit a plateau. It's so frustrating.
It is, but it's also completely normal.
So is this model saying that we should just accept that our progress is going to plateau?
Not necessarily. It's more about being aware of this natural tendency and adjusting our expectations accordingly.
Because we might get discouraged if we expect that initial rapid rate of improvement to continue forever.
Exactly. It's like anything you learn, anything you try to master, you're going to hit these points where it feels harder.
So it's about being patient and persistent, recognizing that real progress often happens gradually.
With bursts of growth followed by those periods of consolidation.
So we don't give up when we hit those plateaus. We keep pushing through.
Exactly, and find ways to push past those limits.
Okay, makes sense. This next mental model sounds pretty intimidating, though. What would Bayes do?
Yeah, it sounds a little scary, right? Like some kind of supercomputer or something?
Right, but I think it's based on Bayes' theorem, which is all about updating our beliefs based on new evidence.
You got it. And while the math behind it can get complex, the basic concept is actually pretty simple.
Okay, good. I'm all for simplifying things.
So imagine you have a hypothesis about something. Let's say you think a certain marketing campaign is going to be super successful.
Okay, got it. I have my hypothesis.
Then some new data comes in. Maybe you run a pilot campaign and the results are, well, not as promising as you expected.
Uh-oh. Reality check.
Right. So what do? Do you stick to your original hypothesis even though the evidence is telling you otherwise? Or do you adjust your thinking?
Sounds like you adjust your thinking.
Exactly. And that's what Bayes' theorem helps you do. It gives you a framework for incorporating that new evidence and calculating a revised probability.
So you're not just going with your gut anymore. You're making decisions based on data and reason.
It's a much more nuanced approach, and it helps you avoid making those same mistakes over and over again.
So it's not about being right or wrong. It's about being open to new information and constantly updating our understanding of the world.
Exactly. And being willing to change our minds when the evidence suggests we should.
Okay, last mental model in this chapter. This one is a bit counterintuitive. Think inside the box.
Right. Everyone always tells us to think outside the box.
Exactly. So what's the deal with this one?
Well, the idea is that our brains are naturally wired to create shortcuts. These mental shortcuts are often helpful, they save us time and energy, but they can also lead to biases and flawed reasoning.
So even when we think we're being creative, we might actually be trapped in our own little boxes.
Exactly. Those boxes are made up of our preconceived notions, our assumptions or biases,
And that can prevent us from seeing things objectively.
and coming up with truly innovative solutions.
So think inside the box is really about recognizing those mental shortcuts, those biases that we all have.
It's about being aware of them and actively seeking out diverse perspectives to challenge our own thinking.
And maybe bust out of those boxes once in a while.
Thank you for listening to Rambling Dan Rowe's Deep Dive Book Reviews. Please help support our channel by clicking the like and subscribe button. Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody. So we left off talking about thinking inside the box, which is really about challenging our assumptions. And that leads perfectly into Chapter 3, which is all about expanding our frames of reference.
Oh, I like that. It's like zooming out, getting a wider view of the world.
Yeah, exactly. It's about recognizing that our own individual experiences, our beliefs, those are just a small piece of the puzzle.
We need to be able to see things from different angles.
Absolutely. And that's where these mental models come in.
Yeah.
They help us expand our thinking, consider different perspectives, and ultimately make better, more informed decisions.
So the first model in this chapter is peer review your perspectives. I mean, we're all familiar with peer review in academic settings, but I guess this applies to other areas of life too, right?
Oh, for sure. Think of it like this. You have an idea, a perspective, whatever, and you want to make sure it's solid, right?
You don't want to be caught with your pants down.
Exactly. So you get feedback from people you trust, people who are knowledgeable in that area, kind of like having a board of advisors for your brain.
Okay, so it's not just about getting your work checked for errors. It's about getting constructive criticism, refining your thinking.
Right. It's about being willing to have your ideas challenged, even if it feels a little uncomfortable.
Because that discomfort can actually lead to growth.
Exactly. It helps you see those blind spots that you might miss on your own.
But it's tough to take criticism sometimes, right? Our instinct is to get defensive.
It is. But if we can approach it with an open mind, be willing to listen and learn, feedback can be incredibly valuable.
Mental model, #14, takes this idea even further. It's called Find Your Own Flaws.
This one's a bit tougher. It's about being your own toughest critic.
So instead of waiting for someone else to point out our weaknesses, we got to find them ourselves.
Exactly. Proactively look for holes in our own arguments, our own thinking.
I can see how that would be helpful, but it also sounds a bit painful.
It can be. Nobody likes to admit they're wrong.
But I guess it's better to catch those flaws early on, right?
Yeah.
Before they blow up in our face.
Right. It's like patching the holes in your boat before you set sail.
I like that analogy. So how do we actually do this, though? How do we find our own flaws?
The book talks about this concept called the third story. It's about trying to see the situation from an unbiased perspective, like you're a fly on the wall.
So detaching from our own emotions and trying to be objective.
Exactly. Because when we're too emotionally invested, we can miss things.
Makes sense. Okay, next mental model. This one is a classic separate correlation from causation.
Yeah, this is a big one. Just because two things happen together doesn't mean one caused the other.
Yeah, we see a pattern, we jump to conclusions, it's human nature,
Okay.
but we got to be careful about that.
Absolutely. So correlation simply means that two things are related in some way. They might increase or decrease together. One might come before the other. But causation means that one thing directly caused the other thing to happen.
So like the classic example, ice cream sales and crime rates both tend to go up in the summer.
Right. But that doesn't mean eating ice cream makes people commit crimes.
There's probably a third factor at play, like the heat, that's influencing both of those things.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to dig deeper, to look for those underlying causes. Don't just assume a connection means causation.
So we got to critical thinkers.
Right. Question our assumptions. And a helpful tool for this is the 5 whys technique. You just keep asking why until you get to the root of the issue.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion.
Exactly. Why are customer complaints increasing? Well, why are customers unhappy? Why is the product failing? Why is the manufacturing process messed up? You get the idea.
I love that. It's like a detective game for our brains.
And speaking of detective games, the next mental model is a visual tool for problem solving. The fishbone technique.
Oh, I'm a visual learner, so this sounds right up my alley.
So picture a fishbone. At the head of the fish, you write down the problem you're trying to solve. Let's say it's, declining customer satisfaction.
Okay, got the fish head.
Then, branching out from the spine of the fish are these bones. Each bone represents a different category of potential causes. Could be things like people, processes, technology, environment, those kinds of things.
Okay, I can see the visual now. So under the people bone, you might list things like inadequate training, low morale, poor communication, stuff like that.
Exactly. And then for each potential cause, you can use that 5 whys technique to dig even deeper and really get to the root of the problem.
I love how this model combines visual organization with that deep dive questioning. It seems really effective. Okay, so we've talked about decision-making, seeing the world more clearly, and now Chapter 4 takes a bit of a different approach.
It's called anti-mental models, how avoidance breeds success.
Anti-mental models. That's an interesting concept. So it's not about what to do, but what not to do.
Exactly. It's about avoiding pitfalls, steering clear of those common mistakes that can trip us up.
It's like that saying, sometimes you win by not losing.
Right. And the first anti-mental model is invert. Always invert. This one emphasizes thinking in reverse.
So instead of asking, how can I achieve success, I should be asking, what could lead to failure?
You got it. By identifying those potential roadblocks, those pitfalls, you can develop strategies to avoid them.
It's like a preventative approach to problem solving.
Right. And it can be really helpful in areas where the stakes are high, like business or investing.
Okay, next up we have avoid your non-genius zones.
This one's all about focusing on your strengths, the things you're naturally good at, and delegating or eliminating tasks that drain your energy or that you're just not that great at.
Oh man, this one hits home. I'm definitely guilty of trying to do it all, even if it means I'm not doing anything particularly well.
Yeah, it's a common trap. We think we have to be good at everything. But this model reminds us that it's okay to ask for help, to outsource, to say no to things that don't align with our strengths.
It's about working smarter, not harder.
Right. Focus on those high-impact activities, the things where you can really make a difference.
The last anti-mental model in this chapter is do the right thing, not the easy thing.
This one's all about integrity, resisting those temptations to take shortcuts or choose the path of least resistance.
It's so easy to fall into that trap though, right? Especially when we're busy, stressed, just trying to get through the day.
It is. But this model encourages us to pause, to think about the long-term consequences of our choices.
We have to align our actions with our values, even if it's difficult.
It's about choosing the path that leads to lasting fulfillment, a sense of integrity, even if it means sacrificing some short-term pleasure or ease.
Okay, we're in the home stretch now. Chapter 4 also covers a bunch of super practical mental models. The first one is a classic Murphy's Law.
Anything that can go wrong will go wrong.
We've all been there, right?
And while it's often used humorously, Murphy's Law can actually be a valuable tool for risk assessment. It encourages us to be prepared for the unexpected, to build in redundancies, to have backup plans.
So if you're planning a big event, you have a plan B in case the weather turns bad or the caterer bails.
Exactly. Anticipate potential problems so you can minimize their impact if they actually happen.
Okay, so we've got to be prepared for the worst, but we also have to strive for simplicity, right? That's where Occam's razor comes in.
Right. The simplest explanation is usually the best. When you're trying to make sense of something, don't overcomplicate it.
So if your garbage can is tipped over and there's trash everywhere, the simplest explanation is probably that a raccoon got into it.
Exactly. You don't need to invent some elaborate conspiracy theory.
Don't overthink it.
Occam's razor helps you cut through the noise and focus on the most likely explanation.
But it's not an absolute rule, right?
Right. Sometimes the simplest explanation isn't the right one, but it's a good starting point, a good reminder to avoid those unnecessary mental gymnastics.
Mental model, #26, Hanlon's razor, kind of builds on that idea of avoiding unnecessary complexity.
Never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity or incompetence or just plain old human error.
So don't assume that someone is out to get you or that they're intentionally trying to screw things up.
Right. More often than not, there's a simpler explanation. Maybe they made a mistake. Maybe they didn't have all the information. Maybe they just weren't thinking clearly.
It's about giving people the benefit of the doubt.
And practicing empathy. We've all been there, right? We've all made those silly mistakes.
Absolutely. Okay, this next one is a familiar friend, the Pareto Principle, also known as the 80-20 rule.
This one's a classic. It reminds us that 80% of our results come from 20% of our efforts.
So we got to focus on those high-impact activities, those 20% activities that really move the needle.
Work smarter, not harder.
And then we have Sturgeon's Law, which is a bit cynical, but I kind of like it.
90% of everything is crap.
Ouch. But it's kind of true, right?
It is. And the point is, don't waste your time on that 90%. Focus on the 10% that's actually good, that's worth your time and attention.
Seek out quality over quantity. I like that. Okay, last two mental models, Parkinson's laws. The first one is Parkinson's law of triviality.
This one basically says that the amount of time and energy we spend on something is often inversely proportional to its importance.
It's like that saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. The things that are the loudest, the most annoying, often get the most attention, even if they're not actually that important.
And it happens all the time in organizations. The book gives this classic example of a committee that spent hours debating the design of the bike shed for a nuclear power plant.
But they barely even touched on the more crucial aspects of the project, like safety protocols or waste disposal.
Right, they got bogged down in the details, the trivial stuff.
So this model reminds us to keep the big picture in mind. Don't get lost in the weeds. Focus on the things that really matter. Okay, last one, Parkinson's Law.
This one states that work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion.
We've all experienced this, right? We procrastinate on a project until the last minute, and then we somehow manage to get it done.
It's like we have this hidden reserve of productivity that only kicks in when we're under pressure.
So this model suggests that deadlines, even self-imposed ones, can be really helpful.
By limiting the amount of time you have available, you force yourself to focus and be more efficient.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about decision-making, seeing the world more clearly, and even avoiding those common pitfalls. And these mental models are just a small sampling of the 30 thinking tools that Peter Hollins presents in his book. So if you're interested in learning more, we highly recommend checking it out. You can find mental models, 30 thinking tools that separate the average from the exceptional online or at your local bookstore.
It's a fascinating read, really thought-provoking, and it gives you practical tools that you can use to level up your thinking, make better decisions, and navigate the complexities of life with more confidence.
I think that's a great place to wrap things up. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of mental models. And until next time, keep those minds sharp.